Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling one of the biggest questions in all of biology. How do we get our features? We're going to unlock the fundamental rules that explain, why you have your mom's eyes, maybe your dad's nose, and a personality that is completely and totally your own. So, let's start with a question you've probably thought about a million times. You look in the mirror, you see bits of your parents, but you are absolutely not a carbon copy, right? This whole puzzle, this incredible balance between similarity and uniqueness, that is the absolute heart of the science of heredity. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that big question. Then we'll jump back in time to see how a humble monk and his pea plants basically cracked the entire code of life. And finally, we'll uncover the core laws of genetics that, write the story of you.
Okay, so to really tackle this puzzle like a scientist, we need to get our heads around two really powerful, almost opposing forces that are constantly at play. And those are inheritance and variation.
First up, you've got inheritance. This is the like father, like son, or like mother, like daughter part of the story. It's literally the process that hands down traits from one generation to the next, creating that family resemblance we all recognize. But then, on the flip side, you have variation. This is the why you're still you part of the equation. It's the measure of all the little differences between you and your parents, and even between you and your brothers or sisters. It is, genetically speaking, the spice of life.
For centuries, people saw these patterns, but the how it all actually worked, was a total mystery. And that all changed, thanks to an Augustinian friar named Gregor Mendel and his surprisingly groundbreaking work with, of all things, the common garden pea.
Now listen to this, because this is what made Mendel an absolute genius. For 7 years, he didn't just look at his plants, he counted them. He applied statistics and mathematical logic to a biological question, which was, it was revolutionary for the time. He used huge sample sizes, which meant his results weren't just stories. They were cold, hard, verifiable data.
And his choice of pea plants? Just brilliant. Look at this cable. Pea plants had these super clear, either-or traits. A plant was either tall or it was dwarf. The seeds were yellow or they were green. There was no messy, confusing middle ground, and that made it so much easier to track how these specific traits were being passed down.
So, to figure out the rules of the game, Mendel did something incredibly smart. He simplified his approach. He decided to track just one single trait at a time. So let's follow his most famous experiment, where he focused only on stem height.
Now, Mendel imagined there were these invisible factors being passed down. Today, of course, we call those genes. And for any single gene, you can have different versions, kind of like different flavors of the same thing. These versions, like the one for tall and the one for dwarf, are called alleles. We use a capital letter, like T, for the dominant version, and a lowercase t for the recessive one.
And this brings us to a really, really critical distinction you have to get. The genotype, that's the genetic blueprint. It's the actual pair of alleles an organism has, like TT or TT. The phenotype, on the other hand, is the physical result. It's what you can actually see with your eyes, like a tall plant. And as Mendel was about to find out, you definitely can't always judge a book by its cover.
So here was his elegant three-step plan. He started with what he called the parental, or P generation. He took a pure tall plant and crossed it with a pure dwarf plant. The first batch of offspring he called the F1 generation. Then he let those F1 plants self-pollinate to create the second generation, the F2.
Okay, so the result in that first F1 generation must have been totally shocking. Every single one of the offspring was tall. It was as if the dwarf trait had just vanished. But then, and this is the amazing part, when those tall F1 plants reproduced, boom, the dwarf trait suddenly reappeared. This little chart, the Punnett Square, shows us exactly how that's possible by mapping out all the probable genetic combinations.
So when Mendel counted his F2 plants, and we're talking thousands of them, he didn't find just a random mix. No way. He found this incredibly consistent pattern. For every one dwarf plant, there were almost exactly 3 tall plants. This 3-to-1 ratio, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a massive clue. But here's the deeper truth, what was going on underneath. If you look at the actual genetics, the genotype, the ratio is really 1-to-2-to-1. You've got 1 pure tall, 2 hybrid talls, and 1 pure dwarf. This hidden genetic recipe is what creates that 3-to-1 physical result that we can actually see. This consistent, predictable, mathematical pattern, this wasn't just some random fluke of gardening. Mendel knew it was a sign, a clue,
that would lead him to his first great principle of inheritance.
And that pattern led him straight to his first huge insight, the law of dominance. It perfectly explains why all those F1 plants were tall. Even though they were carrying the dwarf gene, the dominant tall allele completely overpowered it, basically hiding its presence from view.
But hold on, that brings up another question, right? If the dwarf allele was just being hidden in that F1 generation, how did it manage to reappear totally pure and unchanged in the F2 generation? Well, this leads us straight to Mendel's second law.
The answer is in his second major breakthrough, the law of segregation. What it says is that the alleles for tallness and dwarfness never actually mixed or blended together. They just coexisted. So when the plants made their reproductive cells, their pollen and their ovules, the two alleles separated or segregated from each other. Each reproductive cell got only one of the two copies, and that is why the dwarf trait could be passed on, totally pure and unchanged.
So let's just pull this all together. These two beautiful, elegant laws, dominance and segregation, they form the absolute foundation for understanding that complex dance of heredity that we see in our own families every single day. See, the old idea was that traits just blended together, like mixing two cans of paint to get a new color. But what Mendel proved is that inheritance is particulate. It's more like mixing marbles in a jar. The units, our genes, they stay separate and distinct. This is exactly why a trait like, say, red hair can completely skip a generation and then pop back up perfectly intact. We are all just a unique shuffle of our ancestors' genetic deck.
And that, right there, is the real power of what Mendel figured out. He showed us that underneath all the incredible complexity of life, there are predictable patterns. And once you understand the simple logic of dominance and segregation, you have the keys to unlock the much, much bigger story of genetics. So think about your own family tree. What hidden genetic stories might be waiting there to be discovered?